My name is Aini Mustafa. I'm the program manager for the Resiliency and Business Innovation. This is an Economic Development Administration I-6 grantee and one of 18 programs under the Puerto Rico Science, Technology, and Research Trust. The program is only 1 year old, and the purpose is to help businesses become resilient and also identifying resilient innovations that could be commercialized. The program was created to help businesses in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, but since early January, Puerto Rico has encountered other challenges as well, being the last one that is shared globally. I want to thank George Mason University, Linton, Jean-Pierre, Bob, and Gloria from Echar Palante, as well as my boss, Gilberto Guevara. Together, we were able to design this course, especially for you. In fact, there are 2 courses. The other one is a resilience curriculum designed for businesses, where businesses will create a resilient plan using the Workbook. They will be meeting Thursdays. We are very glad and honored to have you all here and joining us in this course to help our businesses become resilient. And for the next 4 weeks, we will be learning how to guide and prepare businesses to the challenges of a disaster, hopefully before they happen and not in the middle like now. Again, thank you for being here. I want to introduce you to Gilberto Guevara, who is the director for the Resiliency and Business Innovation, as well as the Response Innovation Lab, both programs also at the Puerto Rico Science Technology Trust, to address you on behalf of our CEO. Thanks.
It's a pleasure and an honor to welcome you to this course. We have invested a lot of time and effort and have consulted the best minds in business innovations as well as in business resiliency. On behalf of Lucy Crespo, the Executive Director of the Trust, whose vision is to empower businesses and to create the environment for revival of this economic health that Puerto Rico needs, I welcome you to this course. We are engaged engage in the future to have Mason University continue this development work with you. These items that you will see at the beginning address the current needs of COVID. We intend to be very receptive to your input and your feedback so that in the second iteration or the next set of documents that we prepare, we can include the needs of the business community. We will be addressing some of the needs that have been expressed in the surveys that our program, Colmena 66, has issued, and we welcome and call out to all of you who are mentors and facilitators of business development to step up to the plate to help these businesses complete the cycle of the resilient toolkit that will be distributed and will be shared with all. Again, from Lucy Crespo, welcome. This is what Puerto Rico needs. We need this push and we need this drive to get our economy back on track. Thank you.
Yes, I want to introduce you now Gloria from Echar Palante.
Good evening. I am going to start in Spanish purposefully because we are taping this course and we are going to be offering it in line later on with a translation to Spanish. So I'm going to be using both languages for the salute. Buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a la capacitación en resiliencia y continuidad de negocios para la red de apoyo a los empresarios. Este módulo es el segundo que se ofrece para fortalecer el cuerpo de profesionales que apoyan directamente a nuestros negocios para que estén lo mejor preparados posible para ayudar a nuestros empresarios en el proceso de reabrir la economía. Los colegas que están tomando este programa durante las próximas 4 semanas se están uniendo a la masa crítica de más de 300 profesionales de toda la isla que se están capacitando en las mejores prácticas de acompañamiento y apoyo a los emprendedores a nivel mundial. En esta ocasión contamos con el equipo de expertos en resiliencia de George Mason University, asesores del Departamento de la Defensa de los Estados Unidos, liderado por el Dr. Linton Wells, a quien lo acompañan hoy Jean-Pierre Offred y Bob Rogers. También tenemos a nuestra amiga Peng, que está sirviendo de apoyo técnico en el día de hoy. El Dr. Wells es un gran amigo de Puerto Rico, quien en los pasados 2 años acompañó a la delegación boricua que visitó a Singapur para estudiar el ecosistema empresarial y compartió con nuestros líderes multisectoriales después de los huracanes las mejores prácticas en resiliencia, sirviendo como orador principal del encuentro Echar Pa'lante 2018. Aprovecho para agradecer a nuestros estupendos facilitadores la diligencia y compromiso en migrar tan rápidamente el módulo de resiliencia de negocios para ofrecerlo en línea. Y agradecemos la estupenda colaboración de nuestros grandes aliados del Fideicomiso de Ciencias y Tecnología, en particular a nuestra gran amiga Ani Mustafa, a nuestro querido Gilberto Guevara y a su industriosa líder Lucy Crespo. Quiero que ustedes sepan que desde que el Leadership Team de la Alianza Multisectorial decidió añadir resiliencia a la misión de acelerar el emprendimiento y la innovación en Puerto Rico y fortalecer la certificación de la red de apoyo con un programa de resiliencia, se estableció un esfuerzo de colaboración siglo XXI. En aras de que podamos continuar con el proceso, les habíamos compartido ya a ustedes el currículo de nuestros distinguidos panelistas, así que les paso a Ani, que está sirviéndonos de maestra de ceremonia, para que podamos empezar con el taller. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Now it's an honor to introduce you to our great collaborator, Lincoln Wells. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. JP, will you go ahead and start on the introduction, please?
Yes, thank you, Len, and thank you, Annie and Gloria and Gilberto, and thank everyone for joining. I'd like to give an overview of the course and also the context with the business owners course. So as Annie described, there's 2 courses, one for business owners with the objective ultimately to develop a resilience plan for their businesses, and then an entrepreneurs practitioners, support practitioners course for all of you who are kind enough to join and to support the business owners. So for tonight, I'm going to have 2 parts to the presentation and discussion. A first part on helping the business owners, operators with their course, and then a second part, which is the lesson 1 for the business owners on springing forward from the coronavirus and readying your business for the summer, fall, and economic recovery. As an overview for the Entrepreneurial Support Practitioners course, your course, we're going to have 4 sessions with 4 modules. Tonight, next week, focusing on strategy and policy aspects of Puerto Rican resilience, and then looking at lesson 2 from the business owners, and then module 3 and module 4 focusing on the business owners, lessons 3 through 6. Who's participating from across Puerto Rico? The types of organizations for the entrepreneur support practitioners are universities, NGOs, businesses, and government, and a range of positions from presidents to board directors, program managers, and attorneys. And from across Puerto Rico, you can see that the many cities and smaller sized cities that are represented amongst you. There's about 150 entrepreneurial support practitioners who've registered, and many have actually joined tonight, 145 so far. Business owners are from 7 sectors, from service, restaurants and hospitality, tourism, technology, manufacturing, construction, agriculture. And then you can also see the distribution sizes of the businesses. So many are quite small from the standpoint of number of employees. 1 to 3 is employees, but also the owners, and 4 to 10 employees. So you can see approximately 60% are quite small businesses, and 17.5% are from businesses with 100 employees or over. And again, the roles, many are the owners, presidents, and executives, but also project managers and some attorneys. So for the learning objectives, both for the business owner course, and we'll look at the entrepreneurial support practitioners in a minute. The main part for the owners is by the end of the course, they'll have developed a resilience plan for their business that they'll be able to adopt to different business conditions. And in addition, they'll have developed a COVID-19 recovery plan. So two main outcomes and two main resources that they'll have developed to be able to use over the coming months and years. What will they be able to do, the owners? They'll be able to exercise their business resilience plan, prepare for the 4 phases of resilience, analyze the hazards of Puerto Rico and the changing hazards and how the hazards relate to each other and how there may well be or can be cascading effects from one hazard to another, and protect the core business assets. And they will have learned that the resources, or more so, available resources through the course, but also supplemental speakers that Gilberto, Annie, and Gloria are arranging, and the value of SWOT analysis in the context of resiliency. For your cohort, the entrepreneur support practitioners, in addition, you'll have considered ways for mentoring the small business, examine strategy and policy options for Puerto Rico, discuss the components of the resiliency plans, compare and evaluate the plans produced by the course participants, and discuss Puerto Rican resilience in the context of Fourth Industrial Revolution. Of course, all of you are tremendously experienced, many quite experienced and accomplished in business and government and academia. So all of you have your experience and expertise to adapt what this course discusses for your own, with your own context and experience, and adapt it to and how you interact with the business owners and mentoring. So your experience, as much as Bob, Lynn, and I, and also Annie and Gloria and Gilberto, provides value and benefit to the business owners and to Puerto Rico. So appreciate any suggestions and ideas you have to strengthen the course as we go along, and also to strengthen how we and you all, and Annie and Gilberto and Gloria, interact and contribute to the business's well-being as they further their resiliency and further their thinking about resiliency and recovering and opening back up from the COVID-19. So with that, I'll turn it back to Lynn.
Thank you very much, JP. I'd like to talk about resilience for a little while, because there's a lot that's not fully understood about it. Like, what is it to begin with? Judith Rodden, who's the former head of the Rockefeller Foundation, offered a pretty good definition. It's a capacity. It's not a plan, it's not a strategy, it's a capacity of an entity, whether it be an individual, a community, an organization, an actual system, to prepare for disruptions, not necessarily disasters, various kinds of disruptions, recover from the shocks and stresses, and then to adapt and grow from this disruptive experience. So the two critical concepts in this are organizational capacity, and we'll talk more about both of these, and the ability to adapt and grow. What we try to talk about is not bouncing back to where you were before the disruption, but how do you prepare so you can bounce forward better? You wind up stronger after the stresses and shocks than you were when you started. Next slide. So the graph here, you have a disruption over here on the left, and then there's obviously some duration, some period of degradation, and then you come back in a series of recovery steps. But ideally, if you look at the graph here, on the right, it's actually higher than it was when you started. So your performance level is aligned better to the new normal, the new unnormal, after the disruption. Down at the bottom, there are 4 phases, which is what the National Institute of Standards and Technology uses to talk about this. And one is to anticipate, then you withstand, then you recover, and then finally you adapt and reposition. So those are the 4 kind of phases. Go ahead. it's important to understand the difference between security and resilience. Security lots of times is thinking about locking up and hunkering down and trying to keep bad things from happening. Resilience, on the other hand, is recognize that bad things are going to happen. And so how do you achieve the organization's goals under any level of stress or shock? How do you fight back? How do you emerge stronger? Next. Next slide. Go back one, please. Great. Forward. So in terms of building a resilient capacity, this is really a leadership function. This is not, there's a lot of bottom-up elements to this, but the leadership really has to take charge of this. And you need to build resilience at all levels of the organization. Encourage resilience among the people. And this needs to become a core characteristic that's nurtured and made sustainable. For example, if you have a cybersecurity incident, and if there's a problem, there are two ways to treat it. One is kind of locked down, say, oh, we can't talk about this, it might affect our reputation or our bottom line. The other is to say, there are likely to be other incidents like this. How can we learn from this? How can we turn this into a positive experience? And if the organizational culture is such that you address them the latter way, you're likely to benefit in the long run. There's an old saying that says, culture eats strategy for lunch. And this is the point here. Also treat resilience as a positive business asset. We'll talk later about the return of investment benefits of resilience. Resource it accordingly, and again, you want to build an enduring organizational capacity. Next slide. So to do this, the columnist Tom Friedman, who's sort of channeling Darwin in this case, says it's not the strongest or the smartest to survive, but the most adaptive. And that seems to be true across many, many, many industries and countries and environments. So you have to learn from the shocks and stresses and change behavior. And remember, you can never say that any lesson has been truly learned until behavior changes. You observe a lesson, next hurricane comes through, you re-observe the same lesson. Unless you change your behavior, you're just going to keep observing lessons rather than truly learning. Nassim Taleb, who wrote about black swans, has a book out called Anti-Fragile, looking at things that actually benefit from shocks. So how can you find those and encourage them in your organization? And in order to analyze the shocks and respond to it effectively, the organization needs to be agile. You can't just deal with it with the normal way of doing business. You have to appoint some group of people, tiger team, whatever, to take a look at the new and changing conditions and figure out how you can adapt to them. Next. There are no easy answers to this. There's no silver bullet that's going to let you, solve all the problems. The resilient culture is built on a foundation of ethics, principles, governance, and the compliance is important. The compliance is not just a set of checklists, it's knowing what you should be doing so that when something goes wrong, you have a baseline to say, this is what we should have been doing, this is how we did it differently, and hence we know how to adjust. The details are important. What are the challenges and risks that are specific to your situation? And you have all kinds of people out there providing business intelligence. There's all kinds of information about where the world is going after COVID. You need to focus on what's important to your bottom line, not just generic standards applied to a newspaper article. There are lots of best practices and standards out there against which to benchmark. And later in the course, we'll do a deeper dive into which ones apply to which industries. Next. We mentioned this is a comprehensive approach on continuous improvement. Collectively, what you do should be promoting continuous improvement, not status quo. Test the solutions, exercise them against challenging scenarios. And this will come back over and over and over again as we try to help organizations develop their resilience plans. It doesn't do any good at all if you get the plan done and then just let it sit there on the shelf and gather dust. The British have a wonderful term, SPOTS, strategic plans on top shelves. gathering dust. That's not what your resilience plan should be. There's also an issue about brittle people in organizations. A couple of years ago, I was in Manila, and there's an earthquake fault west of Manila, which moves about every 400 years. And right now, they're about 375 years into a 400-year cycle. And they're projecting 30,000 dead, 100,000 injured, fairly major issue. But as they look at the people in the organization who are real, in the nation who are really resilient, it actually turns out in many cases to be the people in the barrios are much more resilient than the people in the high-rise apartments. And so how do you factor into your planning those people who may never have had a challenging situation, who may never have been exposed to the kind of stresses and shocks that this is facing, and how brittle are they in the sense that instead of being resilient and being willing to fight through, they kind of shatter when the going gets tough. A lot of indicators out there. People established in the cyber area, cyber dashboards, but it doesn't do any good if you're measuring the number of attacks you've defended against or the number of insider threats you've solved if you're importing all sorts of malware through your supply chain. It doesn't matter if you're tracking all the standards and regulations if somebody hasn't bothered to keep the list up to date. And finally, and perhaps worst of all, is the issue of reporting chains that continuously tell the leadership everybody's fine when people at the lower levels know that it isn't, but don't have the organization hasn't encouraged them away, to give them a way to tell the leadership about that. This is not, again, a short-term process. Persistence is essential. It may take several years and several iterations to get it right. But the long-term benefits we'll talk about in a bit of having an organization, a culture that's resilient and willing to stand up and keep on fighting, and your people are willing to stand up and keep on fighting when the going gets tough, is an invaluable business asset. Next slide. So the three kinds of resilience: cultural resilience, operational resilience, and infrastructural. In the cultural resilience, the organization, again, fights back, ethics, principles, governance. The operational resilience really is, can you keep the communications flowing? Are your networks resilient? Are you able to deliver the messages, both internally within your company and externally to the outside world that you want to deliver? And you have enough financial resources in order to get yourself through the crisis. The infrastructural resilience basically says, okay, I depend on power, water, transportation, chill water for my computers, things like that. So are those services sustained and restored? And do you understand, do you and your people understand the growing infrastructure interdependencies among all these things? If you look at, realize this is larger than the typically less than 10-person audience that many of the people in the business course are going to be, but there's just been increasing emphasis in the boardrooms over the past couple of years on resilience and understanding how that fits into the corporation's risk management approaches, and especially these interdependencies among things like power and water and telecommunications. Next slide. But sometimes it's not going to work out. Sometimes you don't get that curve that's going to take you back up above to a new normal that was better than you were before. The circumstances have changed so much, and obviously the thinking about the people in the businesses in the South and the Southwest, what are they going to do? How are they going to get through this? So at some point, it may be important to make a decision on when to pivot. And pivot doesn't necessarily mean giving up. Pivot says, okay, what are some other opportunities that are out there? What are some other ways that I can repurpose mine and my people's talents to take better advantage of the new situation? Next slide. So we talked about the 4 phases, the anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt, and reposition. So adaptability is really the ability to adjust approaches and actions in response to changes in your external environment. Plan for the unexpected. You can't anticipate everything, but you can plan to anticipate things changing. General Eisenhower once said, the plan is unimportant, the planning is everything. So how have you thought through what alternatives you may have? set up a system to respond to change, some kind of structured system to look for the horizon, see what's changing and how to respond to it. There are two different ways they're typically talked about, forecasting and foresight. Forecasting tends to be more common, where you sort of project from where you are into the future. Foresight is really quite different. It looks to try to understand what the future environment is going to be like, and then looks at some different scenarios, typically it's scenario-based, and which ones will be most effective across a different range of scenarios. You don't try to forecast a point solution. And also recognize the new unnormal may be very different. The new post-corona world, everyone tells us, is going to be completely different than where we were in January. How can you not anticipate where it is? How can you set up a series of options that will stand you in good state, irrespective of how it works out? Next slide. Another point on this is there are going to be lots of factors of change, and it's going to vary by sector. Obviously, if you're in the IT sector already, things may be doing fairly well. But how do you adjust the marketing, the R&D, the resources? What new legal regulations, resources, diversification opportunities can be out there? Again, the experiential learning comes back all the time. We have to learn from these experiences, recognize the mistakes, adjust over time, and combine whatever new expertise you're learning with an organization that's flexible enough to change. So some examples of resilience. The city of Joplin, Missouri, in 2011, was subject to one of the most devastating tornadoes in the history of the United States. 161 lives lost, 1,100 injured, 7,000 homes destroyed. And for this, they received about $156 million in federal disaster assistance. So by 2018, actually only about $100 million of it had been spent, but 2019 and this year, they'll have the rest of it pretty much spent. The point was that it took them a while to plan to use the resources in the right way. They also found they had a lot of bureaucracy to deal with. For example, they learned as they were doing their planning that over half of the money had to be spent on low to moderate income housing. That was rules from Housing and Urban Development. So they had a plan for a $44 million new rec center that had to be done away with. In the event, one of the key parts of this is they set up a citizens advisory recovery team. And that citizen involvement with the government, with the private sector was absolutely crucial to what's been considered in the U.S. probably the best recovery from a major disaster like this anywhere. They've been audited 6 different times and not found one single case of violations of the auditing rules. So it can be done. Their focus was in the beginning, we want to build back better, bounce forward better, and Joplin is a place that really has succeeded in doing. Johnson & Johnson is a company that actually this slide is out of date. It's now 58 years of continuous dividend increases, because they just declared one the end of April and even in the middle of this. So 58 years despite changing market, despite lawsuits over things like talcum and some of their drugs. And one of the reasons is the company has a very strong cash flow position, and they've been able to sustain that in order to get through this. They're also it's a very diversified company in the healthcare industry that involves pharmaceuticals and medical devices and consumer products. So it's a combination of diversity, good management, and being, frankly, a pretty good industry. Park University in Parkville, Missouri. The term that's used here is pandemic pragmatism. This is a university, not very big, about 1,600 students on campus, but it's got a worldwide set of campuses of serving basically military training around the world. And so they have been for years immersed in training for military personnel. So they were well positioned when the crisis hit for distance online learning. So then finally, Fukushima. Obviously, the terrible disaster with nuclear power plants, obviously a terrible problem with food and fish and all that was down at one point. It's now virtually completely recovered. But the levels of mistrust that were generated by the government in Japan and the Tokyo Power Company, and also people around the world, there's still 24 countries that won't take product from Fukushima, remains. So the messaging and this comes back into the ethics and the resilient culture that obviously was not in place. And one of the really interesting examples about that was that people came to so distrust what the government was saying about the radiation that companies started manufacturing cell phones with Geiger counters in them. And so the population can go around and do their own measurements and post them immediately to the internet as to what the Geiger counters were saying. Next slide. So we talked about pivoting. So this is actually part of a much longer piece. There's several different signs when it's time to pivot. But obviously, if the market's needs are changing, profits declining, you don't see a viable path to future growth, customers are leaving, what you're offering is not relevant, or just your intuition tells you so. So pivot doesn't mean give up. Pivot doesn't mean, exit the market or not do anything. It's a chance to how do you strengthen your business and your approach. Next. So the three pivots, all pivots start with three good questions. What's your value proposition? What value do you deliver? What are the value networks? How do you deliver and monetize it? Who are your target customers who will receive and benefit from? It's better to do this quickly. Somebody said, ugly, bumpy, and fast is much better than smooth, beautiful, and slow. Hold a pivot party, consider some really wise, some really unusual ideas, do a sanity check on them and try it. And the point at the bottom, honor the decisions you made yesterday, and figure out how to do it better. Next. So one of the things we hope that you as entrepreneur support practitioners will do is to help the owners get the most out of their course. So before the course, please understand the instructional materials that are being used. There'll be a baseline survey of preparedness, and this will feed into a resilience in the box workshop, develop a resilience plan. And in the course of that, we'll add two sections, one on adaptability and repositioning, one on pivot. And finally, the plans will be evaluated, plans developed using these 20 tips. These are all put together by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And someone says, why do we use these out of all the others that are out there? Well, one reason is that, first of all, they're consistent, but they're also in the public domain. There's no charge, there are no copyright issues for people to use them. In addition, all of the materials are available in Spanish. And so it's a significant resource available for Puerto Rico. We have gone a long way out of our way to tailor it. I think as you'll see, this is not just picking up the book and toss it on the table and so go do it yourself. We've tried to adapt this for the conditions in Puerto Rico and for the conditions emerging in Puerto Rico. Next slide. So this is the baseline survey. It's called Resilience in the Box. It asks a series of questions. Have you assembled a team? Have you have all your critical documents available? Next slide. So I mentioned it's completely available in Spanish also. What happens is after you do the assessment, you can grade yourself on a score, and that gives you some idea about just how ready you are and what areas to focus on. Next slide. Second part is during the course. Please keep us focused on business needs in Puerto Rico. We want to do this in a way that meets your standards. Focus on alternative COVID trajectories, the resources available. There's already projections of an active hurricane season. Of course, we already have one named storm already. trends in the earthquakes, the fiscal situation. And if you see any adjustments to the course material, please recommend it. You will actually see the content, lesson content, a couple of days before we give it to the business class. And so please, we welcome any adjustments you recommend. Next slide. This is a picture of this is the workbook itself, which is where we'll be doing most of the work in terms of actually helping the business owners, operators develop their resilient plans. Again, it's bilingually English and Spanish, and it focuses on 6 main areas of how do you protect your operations, your data, people, buildings, equipment, inventory, so on and so forth. So that will be covered in lessons 3 and 4. Next slide. So let me turn it over to Bob now, who will talk more about the workbook and how that part of the course will be done. Bob.
For lessons 3 and 4. So as Len mentioned, this is a resilience book that's been created by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The purpose of the workbook is for business readiness. It's also a guide for disaster relief, and it also gives the best practices in resilience recovery. This book cannot stand on its own. It's just not just about the book. It's also about you, the Entrepreneur Supports Practitioners, and of course the SBA in Puerto Rico. That is the most important aspect of this, working with the entrepreneurs and helping them develop their plans and then carrying them out. Next slide, please. Len's covered a little bit of this, but it bears repeating that there are 6 parts of the workbook. There's people, data, operations, inventory, equipment, and buildings. Each one of these has checklists, forms, worksheets, and they're designed for the entrepreneurs to take the time necessary in order to make sure they have good answers for how to deal with disaster recovery in each of these 6 critical areas. If they have all of their information available, and that's really the key to the whole thing, it should take a practitioner only 5 to 15 minutes to fill out the forms. But the real issue is collecting the data. Next slide. Okay, so what are the steps? I've outlined for you here 5 steps. Step 1, develop your resiliency team. Very critical. You saw the demographics on the number of people in each one of the businesses. You saw that about 40% had businesses that were somewhere between 1 and 3 people. Then you saw another 17% that had over 100. Whether you're in either category or in the middle, the question is that you need to have the right team. Who are the key players that you're going to be relying on? And they're each going to be assigned roles as they go through this process. The second step is to gather the information as a team. You're going to have to execute this as a team, so you need to gather the information as a team. And the whole process of working as a team actually is part of the resilience process. The third step is to answer all the questions in the module. The questions are there and designed for your, not your, but for the company's use and for you to help them in this process. And so it's very important that they do as thorough a job as possible. During the, let's see, the screen just got smaller. But during the lessons 3 and 4, we were going to ask the businesses to actually fill out each one of the three sections. 3 is going to have the first 3, and lesson 3 is going to have the first 3, and lesson 4 is going to have the second set of 3. I'll be on, as well as others, for roughly 1 hour to answer any of the questions through the chat or through the Q&A. And then it's up to the business to go on and finish the assessment. And step 5 is after the class and after both sessions, if once the plan is developed, there's you all will have the ability to support, or through the WhatsApp chat, which I see is already off and running and being used right now, to help the businesses go forward. Back to you, Lynn.
A very important part of this is going to be a subset of mainly of the entrepreneur support practitioners, called facilitators. And there are about 10 of them, maybe more. But they'll be working with the business course students aligned with the individual sectors. We'll probably have about 10 different business sectors. And this will be especially important in lessons 3 to 5. As Bob mentioned, lessons 3 and 4, the worksheets will be worked out. Then in lesson 5, we'll add in the modules on adapt, reposition, then on potentially pivoting. And then by the end of lesson 5, they should have a good resilience plan that will work for them and their business, not just for COVID, but for a variety of different scenarios. Then lesson 6, we'll gather together the lessons and best practices out of those, discuss with the students what other things they might want to incorporate, they might have learned, and then at the end they'll be presented with a certificate of completion, just as you will be considered with a digital badge once you get done with your course. Next. So finally, we talked about what to do before the course, what to do after the course, reinforce the value of the resilience plans, and I can't stress enough the need to maintain them, exercise them. I know it's hard for small businesses, but if you've gone through the trouble to develop a plan, don't just let it sit there. Even if you spend an hour a year, it's like reviewing your business plan. Is this still accurate? It's worth doing. There's a very strong relationship between resilience and return to investment by a number of studies in many, many different industries. Something like every dollar spent on preparations saves something like $4 during recovery. It's a very high return. Learn from facilitators, and then follow up on established mentoring relationships. Next. So then finally, after the plans have been done, this will be part of the lesson 5, lesson 6 transition. The group then has 20 top 20 tips for business preparedness, which really is a go back over your plan and answer these questions, see how you've done. You say it again, it's in Spanish also. Next. So the key takeaways really, 3 main goals from this course. One is to give the Puerto Rican business owners and operators tools, useful tools for them to become more resilient in the face of multiple challenges. And then the key to this is, over the long run, make sure the plan is kept up to date and exercised. Where you and entrepreneur support practitioners provide you with the tools to help the business course graduates sustain the progress they've made. Engagement in the course, and then the term I heard today for the first time is accompaniment. How you can accompany them on their journey to maintain resilience and also maximize the value of what they've learned in the course. And finally, there'll be a discussion next week on ways, strategic and policy ways to make resilient Puerto Rico overall more resilient. I look forward to that discussion very much also. Next slide. The upcoming schedule, we'll have lesson 2 next Tuesday. 2 aspects, strategy and policy aspects of Puerto Rican resilience. And then the lesson 2 for the business course, concepts of resilience. SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then an introduction to the workbook. And the first part of that will be looking at a hazards analysis, which is just how would you rate red, yellow, green the different types of hazards are out there as it could affect your business. Over. Next. So, questions very welcome. We have about 15 minutes until the scheduled break, and whether in the chat or actually, please use the Q&A feature, which is down at the bottom of the screen, to tee up questions. And I see there are a couple there.
Yeah, Linton, you have 2 questions in the question and answer. I think both are right on right now. You may want to answer the second one first. Well, the one from Miguel Vivaldi Oliver. Given the situation in Puerto Rico that we have been going through several situations one after the other, he's asking your recommendations on how to handle that. When you're making business plans, given that we're getting all these different situations, the hurricanes, COVID, the earthquakes, so on and so forth.
Well, this is one of the things that will be factored into the development of the plans through this workbook. One of the reasons why I like the workbook is it lets you address, this is what I need to do to get ready for the earthquake. This is what I need to do to get ready for the hurricane. And what may be may be valuable for one part of the country and one might not be valuable to another. And then COVID might be something that affects everyone. And so the workbook lets you tailor your response to what you need. Because the question is the archipelago, is the same solution the same for all size businesses across the archipelago? And probably not. There are certainly some things that need to be done at the public policy, at the governmental level. There are issues of, as again we talked about next week, if you're going to deal with post-disaster recovery, what steps you need to have taken to be able to receive government money. If you are going to, one of the points that came out in the story about the university, the pandemic pragmatist, is it's almost never either shut down or be fully open. But how do you reopen in ways that maximize your likelihood of not getting reinfected? And I realize that here in Puerto Rico, the infection is not nearly the problem that it is in New York and places like that. And that's fine. That's why Puerto Rico's response probably isn't going to be the same as New York. But the question is, how do you think through it in order to tailor your plan to what you need?
Thank you. And I think that the next one from Miguel also follows up on the previous one. Maybe you can please answer Jaime Jordan's question regarding, he would like you to go back to the examples you gave and expand a little bit on what was done regarding the 3 main factor components, particularly planning, in the examples that you mentioned before.
Absolutely. So in the case of Joplin, the devastating tornado, virtually every city in that part of the country has some sort of a severe weather plan. And it's not just tornadoes, it's floods and various other things. But I don't think anybody in Joplin planned for the magnitude of just the entire portions of the city being flattened. So they clearly had to adjust after the tornado. And one of the questions was, do we even want to rebuild? Do we just want to move the town to somewhere else? And that was a serious debate. But once they decided that, yes, we're going to stay here and rebuild, then the question was, how do you put together the plan for that rebuilding? And in this case, the development of the Citizens Advisory Recovery Team, where it was a whole of society effort. It was not just public and private. It was not just, it was the government and the citizens and the businesses and the non-governmental organizations, and so on and so forth, working together. And then clearly they ran across some problems because their initial plan didn't take into account the rules that they had to comply with in terms of low-cost housing. So they had to adjust that. And then eventually they came up with about $300 million worth of desires, which they tailored for the $156 million that was available to them. So I think in this case, there was a general plan to begin with. And then after it was over, it was striking was A, the decision to fight back, and B, the inclusiveness of the approach that they took, and the fact that since there was audits, and as everyone knows how badly post-disaster money can lead to misspending. In this case, the fact they went through a whole series of audits by the State Inspector General with no violations indicated that this was a tightly run, effective process. In the case of the Johnson & Johnson, I mean, you just don't have a business that runs 57 consecutive years of dividend increases without having some serious planning, resilience planning involved. They had the good fortune to be located in a resilient industry, the combination of healthcare plus the diversification of being in the pharmacies and medical devices and consumer products stood them in good stead, and good enough stead to withstand a number of pretty serious lawsuits that might have undermined or toppled somebody else. It remains to be seen, I think, how they'll do in COVID, but ironically, as a healthcare provider, they're probably pretty well positioned for this particular crisis.